אמנות, יצירה, בובות לייב, שוב אנחנו כאן יום שלישי בשעה 8:30 וכבר אנחנו מתחילים. היום אני מארח את דמיטרי קרטר, מנהל מרכז תיאטרון הבובות של בסיאטל, ארצות הברית. בדרך כלל אני עושה פרזנטציה עם מצגת ומוזיקה ומציג את האורח, אבל הפעם לא, אנחנו ניתן לדמיטרי להציג את עצמו, בואו נצרף אותו אלינו. Hello, Dimitri.
Hello, Ilan. Thank you for having me here today.
Well, someone just asked me in the chat if I invited you today, especially for the day of the election. And actually, when we set the date, I didn't do the connection. And it was only this morning that I realized that this is the day.
Just a coincidence, yeah. It's a good distraction.
Is it like a big day in America?
A lot of people are focused on it. So, yeah, this is a good distraction. Something else to talk about.
Yeah, well, hopefully the result will be as you want it.
That's what everybody hopes for. Their own choices.
Right, so what I said earlier in Hebrew, that usually I make a presentation with music and blah, 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 and effects to introduce the guest, but this time I won't. I will just say that this is one of these shows that I was expecting the most. To speak with a colleague and someone who grew up with puppet and not just accidentally find his way, because this is one of the things that always interests me. How does one get into puppetry? In Hebrew it sounds worse.
Well, I was
into puppetry,
but born into puppetry in my case.
So do tell.
Yeah, so my parents began doing puppetry and then started a company with some friends straight out of college. So by the time I was born, they were already performing. They were actually doing a show that the day I was born. So, you know, I just grew up backstage, and by the time I could start getting in the way and getting into trouble, I was, you know, helping out with some of the shows back there.
Well, helping out is something we will talk about, because something that I saw in other interview that you were talking about. So your parents were Christine and Stephen Carter.
Exactly.
Here.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why doesn't it show? Wait. Trying to show it. Wait. It's live. Yeah. We have problems. Why do we have problems? Because I didn't click on the right one. There we go.
There we are. Yeah. So that's my father Stephen and my mother Chris, but also Todd and Josie Moore are backstage with them on that production. So straight out of college, my parents started a company with some of their friends, and the first company that they started here in Seattle was the Family Bathtub Theater. And for people that know Seattle, it was right down by Pike Place Market. And so that went on for a few years. And then some of the friends went on to other careers. And then my parents and their friends, Todd and Josie, started their next company was Theater Picaro. And Theater Picaro began to do some more touring activities. And that actually started getting some international attention and went to some festivals around the world. So yeah, that was the origins of our family company. And then eventually Todd and Josie went on to do other things as well. Josie was a great local elementary school teacher for many years. And Todd became a really well respected actor here locally in the Seattle theater community. And he's done a lot of work that's really fantastic. A little bit with puppetry, but more as himself as a human actor.
And your parents formed the Carter family marionettes.
Yeah. So then it became just my family, and we were the Carter family marionettes. We started as a touring family troupe. Yeah, there's my sister and I. So that's when we started having leading roles in the shows. Before that, we would have small parts, but at about that age, we started having, you know, important roles in the shows. So that was maybe in the mid 80s there. That photo is probably about 84, somewhere around there. It was a production we did of Fundavogel, which is a fairy tale about a little boy who falls out of a crow's nest. And we did a little bit of an adaptation of the fairy tale to make it that when he falls out of the crow's nest, he's adopted into a circus family, because we wanted to play with a lot of the circus tricks of the circus marionettes. And so we had, the trapeze artists and the tightrope walkers and the, stilt walkers and jugglers and all sorts of those, classic trick marionettes that we incorporated into the story.
So what was your childhood like? You would go to school in the morning and perform in the afternoon?
Actually, our truancy laws weren't as strict in that time, so I actually missed a lot of school. We would just go on tour, and I wouldn't go to school, and I'd just be busy working. But then, sometimes my teachers would send me with homework to do, or assignments to turn in when I came home. There wasn't anything like Zoom classes or anything like that we have today. So yeah, a lot of my childhood was spent on the road, touring around, performing shows. Like I mentioned, as soon as I was old enough to start helping, my sister and I, we would start helping out. And that photo right there is when we were in Romania. My dad had a chance to have a Fulbright fellowship at Teatru Tenderica, the famous puppet company, which actually I think just celebrated a big anniversary. I think it's their 75th anniversary maybe today. But yeah, they're an acclaimed company in Bucharest, Romania. I believe they hosted the UNIMA, the International Puppetry Association. They hosted the UNIMA Festival, I think in maybe '62, somewhere around there. So yeah, it's been a major force in the international puppetry community for many years. And my father had the Fulbright to study with a great carver there, Julius Shuteu, who was the main wood carver at the company. So yeah, it's that was a couple of years. And then shortly after Romania, we were inspired by seeing all of the really well-established puppet companies in Europe, because, in addition to spending a couple of years in Romania, we had a chance to travel around Europe and visit different puppet theaters, different puppet museums. And so at that point, my parents decided, they wanted to try to establish a permanent venue here in Seattle that could serve our community instead of just constantly being on the road touring all the time.
So let's just talk about touring. Was it so, as a child, was it obvious to you that this is what you're doing? I mean, looking back, isn't that a little bit weird?
Sure. Even then, I understood it was a little bit different than what most of my friends were doing. I'd hit the road and be working, doing shows, traveling, sleeping in the van when we're driving, and then sleeping at motels, and then setting up the show and, performing for audiences. It was really funny, as maybe a fourth grader, sometimes, other kids would ask for my autograph or something like that. And I thought that was really funny because, as puppeteers, we're not really, seen as famous people the way, a movie star or something like that would. You were usually kind of, more behind the scenes and don't really get the attention. But yeah, it was a interesting childhood. And like you're saying, kids, they just do whatever, and that's their life because they don't know anything else. And so for me, I grew up with it, and yeah, it was an interesting childhood and lots of work. We often joke that we spend more time carrying and loading shows than performing. So it's a lot of work. Carrying big heavy boxes is a lot of the life of a puppeteer.
Yeah, was when we used to travel.
We'll carry boxes again.
So when you talk about helping out, what do you mean?
So I think when I was about 3 years old is when I first started helping with the shows, and at that point, for a lot of our shows, they're marionette productions. So we would have a bridge, and then we would often, for a low bridge show, we would be reaching over the backdrop and performing the marionettes below. But at that point, I was too short, and I couldn't reach over the backdrop. And so they had to make a little step for me that I could climb up on top so that I could work the puppets there. Otherwise, I wasn't able to reach. And at that point, I think, you know, if it was nap time, I could, you know, curl up and take a nap under the stage. But if I wanted to help out with the show, I could help. And so it was kind of an option at that point. And that's why I really say more just kind of helping out than actually performing at the age of 3. But by the time, you know, I was like 5 or 6 or something, I had small roles in shows. And then by about 8 years old, we had, you know, my sister and I, we would both have pretty major roles in the shows. And it wasn't possible anymore to take a nap instead of performing anymore.
and the mixture of having the parents as director was obvious? Could you make the definition? I'm asking this because my father was a driving teacher.
Oh, interesting.
And he taught me to drive, and it was like horrible for him and horrible for me.
Well, we had a very different you know, way of running our company, and it was much more of an ensemble practice. And I think just, you know, having done it forever, you know, there wasn't that strict regiment of training and direction. It was just kind of a more natural, just starting to jump into it, and then, you know, slowly building the skills over the years. So it was never really clear delineation between, you know, you're a puppeteer and I'm the director. You know, we were just all working as an ensemble even back when I was a little kid. So it was more of a collaborative endeavor.
So how many years were you on the road?
We continued touring to a lesser extent, even after we started Northwest Puppet Center in Seattle. You know, we would still, especially in the summer times, we would hit the road and do a lot of touring. And then sometimes we would also have guest artists performing at our theater, or between shows, sometimes we would pick up gigs here and there so we could, you know, supplement that way. So we continued touring for, you know, pretty extensive touring for, maybe about 20 years of pretty extensive touring. Yeah.
And at what year you formed the Puppet Center?
I'm always bad with exact dates. I think we started the Puppet Center in 1988, maybe. We first started the Puppet Center. We were renting space at a community center. It's the Finney Neighborhood Center for people that know the Seattle area. And we rented the space down below. They have a wooden building up on the hill, and then down below they have a brick building. And we were down in the brick building for about 5 years running a season there until we found the building that we're at now. And we've been there for, maybe about 28 years now. We've been in the Maple Leaf neighborhood. So I think the Puppet Center has been going for 33 years. And then the Carter Family Marionettes, we started in the mid-'80s. So, and then before that into the '70s, it was the Family Bathtub Theater and then the Theater Picaro. So a long history of doing puppets in the area. And that's a beautiful whale right there that our friend George David made for us, the orca whale that's in front. Yeah, he's a new channeled carver from a family of artists.
Well, it looks like a place filled with atmosphere.
Ah, yeah, we try.
Although it was very hard to find a picture of the inside. There are lots of pictures on the web of the outside.
Yeah, we ask people not to take pictures during shows. And so we don't have a lot of people taking pictures during the performances. And then our exhibit area downstairs, we have, you know, a little museum area. And one of the tricky things is the puppets are behind glass. So it creates problems for the photographs. But those are great. Yeah, that's Tatterman Marionettes did in Chicago at, I believe, the 1934 World's Fair, did this production of Buck Rogers. They were asked to do the production by the newspaper, who was just starting to run the comic strip of the science fiction character. And so Buck Rogers, they did a puppet show at the World's Fair, and they also did the first little short film of it in '34. And those were the original puppets. And there's our thousands and thousands of puppet books. I believe we've become the most extensive puppet research library in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah, and there's in our shop I was working on, it looks like that day I was working on a marionette from Guangdong province.
How many people are working at the Puppet Center now?
Now mostly myself, and we have actually just recently opened our exhibit again, so we have a gallery attendant as well. But we keep a small overhead. It helps you know, with making sure that our organization can be sustainable even in normal times. But in times like this, it's even more important that, you know, we don't stretch ourselves too thin financially. But at the same time, we were talking earlier about, you know, just being such a marathon when you're, you know, dedicating your career to something like puppetry. So, you know, we try not to stretch ourselves thin financially, but also as individuals, you know, you need to pace yourself and not work yourself to death.
And that building was a church?
Yeah, so the building was a church, and for Seattle, it's an old building. For the rest of the world, it's a modern building. It's 1929. And so, you know, friends from Europe or wherever, you know, they'll say, oh, that's a brand new building. But Seattle is such a young city that it's considered, you know, a relatively older structure. And it already had the gathering hall upstairs. We improved it a little bit for sight lines and put in, you know, lighting and curtains and a fly system. So we made some adaptations to make it into a performance hall. And then there was already a downstairs area that we opened up a little bit more to create our exhibit space. And we try to create a new exhibit every season. So we just opened our new exhibit. We decided with everybody wearing masks nowadays, we would do an exhibit of masks. So we have a global mask exhibit now up, which is really quite exciting because, you know, the masks and puppetry, you know, they're kind of like cousins, and there's a lot of blurry area and some mixture of traditions where the puppets will be performed alongside masks, and some of the masks will have puppet elements. And so we were able to explore some of those you know, areas that we don't look at so much. Oftentimes with our exhibits, we might focus on, you know, a specific artist or a specific company or a specific culture or a technique. And so for this one to focus on mask is kind of fun.
And you had another building.
Yes, for a short period, we had some major financial support, which allowed us to have a storage space. And so it gave us the opportunity to spread out and look through a lot of our collections. You know, I was mentioning early in our career, we were primarily a touring company. And then when we started the Puppet Center, you know, we became not only performers, but also presenters. And then the past 10 years or so, we've been focused a lot on developing our museum collections. And it's really exciting because we've grown to become, you know, one of the most extensive resources on puppetry. We have puppets from all over the world, some of them dating back, you know, a couple of centuries, mostly, you know, 20th century puppets, but we have some 19th and even 18th century puppets. And in our library going into 1600s. So.
We'll speak about the collections later, but
sure.
Just tell me what is that?
That was the storage space that we had for a short time, and I was very sad to let it go, but we just couldn't afford it. And, you know,
storage place. I will show the pictures because, you know, for us, a storage place is just a dark room when you put things, and this is like another wonderful place that you had.
Yes, it was a lovely space, and we had it for a few years, but then we had to sadly let it go. Like I said, the finances were too difficult without the financial support that we had been expecting. But yeah, you know, if we were trying to continue to keep that space right now, it would make it even more difficult for us economically. So, you know, everything sort of works out for the best.
So let's go back and see a film, a documentary made in 2005.
Okay.
we will see the first few minutes that briefs the history of the company, the troupe, how do you call it? So here it comes.
Cosmonaut!
Oh my, a Russian cosmonaut!
Cosmonaut!
Oh, how exciting!
My parents, Chris and Stephen Carter, they began doing puppets separately when they were kids.
Здравствуйте!
When I was a teenager, I started carving wood. In high school, the best teacher in the whole school was Mr. Payne, the drama teacher. And Chris and I come from, well, it was a medium-sized town. We're childhood sweethearts, by the way, so we've been living together forever, essentially. So gradually I started to meld sculpting with my theater work, and actually did start doing Punch and Judy shows. I tried a shadow puppet play in high school. Chris had done some puppetry when she was a young child, so she'd had some experience with puppetry. And we both went off to university. We went to the University of California. It was an experimental atmosphere at the college in those days, so they were quite open-minded about any type of experimentation. So my senior thesis got me my BA was a puppet show, actually. As a family, we traveled with our puppet show. We toured in Europe one year about 1980.
The family idea dates back hundreds of years from when the first itinerant puppet troupes began, and there were families of puppet players that would travel around bringing their shows from town to town. And so this is an age-old tradition that we kind of follow in the footsteps of. My son is starting to perform and help out too. He's 3.5 now, but he's already crazy about puppets and helping out. He's kind of interesting. He's a 3rd generation puppeteer on my side and a 7th generation puppeteer on my wife's side. So there's a family tradition on both sides.
So we lived for 2 years in Romania. From there we were able to travel around, and we especially like the Sicilian style of puppets.
The specific style is from Palermo, and the character here is Ruggiero. He's the Prince of North Africa, and if he sees a dragon or anything, he'll pull out his sword. Hop, hop. Since my parents are the founders, I've been performing since I was little. As soon as I could climb up on stage, I was helping out, and as I grew up, I'd start getting more important roles. The public in the U.S. isn't too familiar with a lot of the puppet traditions found around the world, and so there's a whole array of things that we can share.
So let's talk about traditions. What's the importance of keeping the traditions? I mean, we are moving forward all the time. Puppetry moves forward all the time. What's the importance of the traditions?
Well, I think there's several important factors. You know, one of the factors is that even with the innovation, you know, a lot of the artists doing new work draw inspiration from some of the traditions. So they're taking the traditions and evolving it in new ways and adapting it, using you know, different aesthetics, using a mixture of techniques. You know, so there's a lot of tradition, even when you see some modern work of you know, whatever, you know, modern puppet artists are doing work out there. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that a lot of puppet history and puppet culture was never written down. And so it's been just passed down, you know, as an intangible cultural asset. And that's a term that UNESCO's been using a lot for different art forms around the world. And we're really lucky that they've recognized a multitude of puppet traditions as this intangible cultural asset of humanity. And so, you know, it's a recognition that these puppets have been a method for transmitting, you know, these traditions for thousands of years in some cases. And so for it to continue all that time, I think it's important to recognize it and try to document some of that. Oh.
Dimitri, I think we're having some Wi-Fi problems on your side.
It seems okay.
So now it's better. So now it's better. So you have to say it again.
Oh, okay. So I was just saying that you know, there's a couple of different aspects about the preservation of the traditions. One element of it is that a lot of the modern artists have been inspired by and adapt from some of the traditional techniques, even when they're doing, you know, really avant-garde work. And another aspect of it is that, you know, these traditions have been passed down for centuries. Some of the traditions have been passed down for millennia. And so for these traditions, many have never been written down. It's always been a direct transmission from the puppeteer to the apprentice. And so, you know, to continue the skills and to begin writing down that culture and that history, I think is really important. And we're at an interesting time now because finally the academic world and museums outside of puppet museums are finally taking notice of puppetry. And there's, you know, theater programs and different anthropology programs, you know, different programs in academia where they're paying attention to puppetry and the impact it's made on human culture. So I think we're at an exciting time for that sort of research to take place. And then for the museums also, it's really exciting for us because a lot of puppeteers, you know, they'll collect it because, you know, they'll be friends with an older puppeteer who might be retiring, and the puppeteer might need a home for these puppets or for their personal collection. And so often the puppets are passed down within our puppetry community. But then outside of the puppet community, some of the big museums are finally starting to take notice of puppets and realize that they're an important artifact. So it's interesting.
So was it a deliberate intention for the Carter Marionette group to preserve traditions, or was it just the, you know, the personal artistic taste of the founders?
I think personal artistic taste to start with. My parents actually did a lot of really avant-garde work, you know, when they were just starting out. And even, you know, throughout their careers, they would experiment with different techniques and sometimes do more, you know, experimental work. But they kept being drawn to some of these traditions. Partly, I think, because my dad really prefers wood carving over some of the other materials. And so when you're making the wood puppets, you look at the other traditions around the world and you see, you know, all of the wood carvers making puppets. And so I think maybe some of it might have been just because of the material.
And you continue to keep the form of troupe even with the new generations.
Well, actually,
your sons, your sisters.
So it's funny. I was mentioning earlier that when I was a kid, I missed a lot of school because we'd be on the road performing. And for my son's generation, it's not so easy to miss school. So there he is on tour with us. That was actually when we took our show to New Orleans. We were one of the first performances to happen in New Orleans after the Hurricane Katrina. None of the venues were open, so we were performing at a atypical venue. We were just kind of out in the plaza of a shopping area performing for the community there. It was an event put together by, I think it was the New Orleans Symphony, and they brought several performers to town to do some, you know, less, well, they call it less traditional venue, but for puppets, it's actually very traditional for us to perform in piazzas, in the streets, you know. So it's one of the adaptable traits of puppetry is, you know, we can perform at a fancy theater or we can perform on a street corner. We can adapt to whatever the circumstances.
Depends who you are. On my side, we can perform in fancy theaters.
Well, it's often nicer to perform in fancy theaters. We've had issues performing outside sometimes, you know, getting stuck in storms or what have you.
Well, you know, in Israel, most of the time it's hot. So my personal artistic taste was always the air condition.
Oh, yeah. If we had heat, I think I would also have to agree with you. But here it's cool enough that it's not too bad.
But is it like in your family an easier thought, like we have a show, we are going to tour, it's easier for us to take the young generation rather than hire like a professional skilled puppeteer?
Well, I'll take slight offense to professional skilled, because I believe growing up in a puppet family, you wind up developing those professional skills. But I do get your point, though, that you know, there is an economics side of performing with a family troupe, and that's been true dating back hundreds of years. You know, if you have a troupe with 4 people and each of them are from a different household, your show needs to be able to support those 4 households. But if you have, you know, a mom and a dad and a couple of kids, you know, you have a 4-person show, but you only have to support 1 household. So it does become an economic component of how to organize a theater company. Having a family troupe makes financial sense in many ways. But going back to the point of skills is that, you know, growing up in an art form, you begin an apprenticeship immediately. And so you wind up developing these skills. And, you know, one of your questions earlier is why do you continue with this, or why did you get started in puppetry? And for me, by the time, you know, I was 18 and, you know, thinking about, should I stay with this or pursue some other career? At the age of 18, I had already had 15 years of experience performing puppets. So, you know, to stay with it, you know, it seemed like a good decision. It seemed like it would have been a shame to throw that all away and start at the bottom of a chain on some boring office job.
Was there ever a dilemma? Like when as a teenager, did you have the need to rebel against the family and do something else?
Not really. You know, it was a job, you know, and I sort of saw it as a job as a teenager. And then I had, you know, my own life as a kid, you know, hanging out with friends, doing whatever kids do. So it wasn't my entire life at the point. And so I didn't see a reason to rebel against performing. Maybe sometimes have little arguments with my parents over other things, but not really so much about performing. There was one point, though, that's kind of funny, is, you know, when we were really little, we didn't get paid at all. And then for many years, my sister and we got paid $1 for each show. and then I joke with my sister because, you know, she was about to go on strike because the pay was too low, and so she was able to basically unionize the child labor, and we got a raise to $5 a show. And thinking about child labor is, you know, that's another thing about working with your family. Is working with your family, you're allowed to help out. If otherwise, you know, the child labor laws would not allow such things.
I get it. So, but when you went to college, you studied something else. You didn't go to drama, like a drama college, or
no. I studied nothing relevant to my career. Here in Washington, we have a program called Running Start, and I was kind of the first generation of kids to take advantage of that program. And it allows kids when they're 16. Instead of continuing high school, they can go straight to college, and it's paid for by the state, so it's completely free. So I went to college when I was 16. I just took whatever classes seemed interesting, and I got an Associate of the Arts degree from there. You know, I took a jewelry class because I was interested in doing metal work. one reason why I was interested in the metalwork is from that clip earlier with the beautiful night puppet. That's a tradition from Sicily, and I really love the metalwork. So that's always been a dream of mine, is to get good enough at the metalwork to make beautiful armor like that for the puppets. And then one other class that I took that came in useful for my career is I took 2 years of Chinese language classes. You know, when I was a kid, we traveled around internationally, and so I saw the importance of learning languages. And you know, wherever I go, I try to pick up at least a few phrases. And so, you know, as a little kid, I picked up a little bit of Romanian. But then I figured, you know, having the chance to go to a college class and learn a language, I should learn something that more of the world speaks. So I was thinking, you know, which languages, and I was thinking probably, you know, Spanish and Arabic and, you know, Chinese would probably be the most people I could talk to if I had those languages I was able to speak. And so I wound up taking 2 years of Chinese at college. And, you know, subsequently I've done a few collaborations and been able to do some research on Chinese traditions. My son's mother was also a Chinese puppeteer. So had a chance to practice the language at home as well.
And then, well, I prepared when I saw your pictures from when you were a teenager and youngster. I just had to made me look for mine.
Ah, oh wow, great.
Well, I'm not 12 here. I was 21.
Yeah,
22, not 22. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And yeah, and that's I also have the very first paid show I ever did for money.
Yeah.
I was wait, where is it?
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's it. I was 12 performing in the building next to our building. So this is like
that's fantastic.
I took a chair.
The chair stage, yeah.
And made it, and that considered to be the very first paid show. I would consider.
Oh, that's great! It's
a professional.
So that you have a photograph of it to document the.
Yeah, well, you know, we talk about the importance of documenting, and we will talk about it more when we talk about the collection that you.
Yeah.
But we have one question from Nadine from the audience. Let's see. Did you start creating those productions when you were young and performing them as part of family groups? So how young? And so I don't have to translate it.
Yeah. So our productions primarily were collaborative productions. And so we'd work together on building and performing the shows. That photograph that you showed of me and my family sitting on the stage when I was a kid, that show, I remember developing some of the dialogue for my own characters. One element of our own productions is that we tended not to use, there's the show I was thinking about. So even at that age, we were developing our own lines for our characters because we tended not to use scripts, and instead we'd improvise the dialogue, and we'd sometimes fall into patterns. So, you know, some of the dialogue, if we liked it, it would tend to solidify. And then, you know, if circumstances required, we would kind of flow in other directions with our lines, but we tend to bring it back to the scenario. And so that's also an age-old, you know, technique of puppeteers, of not necessarily having a written script. So as far as creating the performances, you know, they all kind of evolved, and I. Hey, Gene. Yeah, that was a fun show. Yeah, so yeah, we would develop the shows in that way. But also as creators of the show, you know, my dad studied carving, and so he would do the majority of the carving for our shows. And you know, as deadlines approach and the production schedule gets a little bit tighter, you know, everybody would pitch in and help out. And so I started specializing pretty young. In doing things like stringing the marionettes and building the controls for the marionettes and developing special effects. And so we all kind of had different areas that we would work in. So my dad would be carving and painting. My mom would be doing costuming, and I would be doing stringing and special effects and whatever needed to be done. At one point, you know, my father decided, you know, he enjoyed carving the heads a lot more than carving, you know, 20 pairs of hands. And so I started getting pretty good at carving hands.
Did you enjoy? Like, was it a special like a comment from the audience when after a show the whole troupe would go out and they would find out that some of the puppeteers are children?
Sure, there was some surprise, and it's nice, you know, to have that interaction with the audience after shows. Yeah, one of the interesting things about puppets is that you have these different components. You know, as a performer, you get to, you know, interact with the audience and hear the cheers. And then as a maker, you have the quiet time where you sit in the workshop and you make some wood chips. And so it's nice to have that kind of a balance of the excitement of a live performance and a live audience, and then also the quiet time of just sitting there working on your own.
And then you went to China to study puppetry.
So my first trip to China was actually in 1997. We were organizing a big puppet festival here in Seattle for 1999. We called it the Festival of the Millennia. And, you know, we figured there wouldn't be another one in America before the end of the year. So we had this plan for this big festival. And so in 1997, I went over and invited the greatest marionette master to come to Seattle for the festival. And at that point, he'd never been to America to perform before. He toured all over the world with his performances, but never to America. So I went to personally deliver the invitation to him and ask him to come to Seattle. And so he came in, I guess that was August of 1999 for our festival that we had here. And we had about 800 puppeteers from all over the world come to Seattle. It was a pretty exciting event. So Huang Yi-Cui ended up staying at my house for 3 months, though, on that visit. And he then decided, you know, he'd officially accept me as one of his apprentices, which is kind of a big deal. Traditionally, an apprentice is supposed to ask the master in a big banquet where you invite, you know, hundreds of people and have a banquet. And at the end, you ask if they'll take you on as an apprentice. And as the apprentice, you have to pay for the big banquet and you don't know the answer. And so it's a really risky thing to ask somebody to teach you, because you could wind up getting humiliated in front of everyone and waste all of your money trying to, you know, pursue this career. But Huang Yi-Cui, he didn't make me go through the formalities. When he was here in Seattle, he told me that I could be his apprentice. And he said that actually, to my surprise, before a performance, and he hadn't warned me in advance, so it was quite a shock. The sad thing, though, is that, you know, the traditional apprenticeship program with him, most of his students studied with him for years, and he told me that because of my experience with puppetry, that, you know, some of it came to me a little bit more naturally because I already had some concepts, even though it was from perhaps a different tradition. And so he told me that if I could seriously study with him for 6 months, I could probably get okay. But I never had a chance to spend that much time with him. So I only have the very rudimentary skills in the Chinese marionettes.
Is this the right picture? Am I right?
Yeah, that's my old friend Huang Yi-Cui at his house. He asked one of his friends who was a calligrapher to paint this sign for me. And it says, a loose translation is, pass on the puppetry arts.
Right.
Yeah. And so I thought that really, you know, summed up an important piece. Oh, did you translate it there?
I did.
Oh, well done.
With effect.
That's great. Yeah, so I still have that calligraphy. I need to mount it or frame it, but I still have that piece of calligraphy as a good reminder for the work that we continue to do. You know, like you're talking about all the other traditions and all the work we do. You know, it doesn't mean much if it doesn't continue. So
yeah, but you have to be willing to pass it out. I mean, it's a mission. It's a very serious mission to do.
It is, and in the modern world, a lot of people don't have that type of dedication to stick with something. You know, like Huang Yi-Trui was saying that, you know, most of his students would stick with him as apprentices for many years. You know, that's not the type of dedication that a lot of people have anymore. Yeah, he actually had an interesting start for his career. You know, he was of an age where he started performing puppetry before the Cultural Revolution, so it was a very traditional apprenticeship for him. There was a puppet company, and he would often go watch their shows, and he was supposed to be doing things like heading up to the hills and gathering firewood for his house or something, and he would instead go to the puppet show. And so he would always get in trouble from his parents because he wasn't doing his chores, and instead he would just go see the puppet show. And so he apprenticed with his first master, and back in those days, you were supposed to master 2 of the character types before you could go out on your own and start performing independently. And so in the traditional Chinese theater, there's 4 character types. And so if you knew how to perform 2 of the 4, you know, you could be a pretty solid performer and help carry a show. So with his first master, he studied 2 of the character types. And then he went on to study with another master, and he mastered a 3rd technique. And he said later in his career he got okay at the 4th, but he was being modest. He was one of the few that really, you know, knew all the character types. And it was really interesting because along with wanting to carry on the traditions, he was also open to innovation. And one of the things that ostracized him from his masters was that the traditional Chinese marionettes, for the upper leg, there would be a piece of rope, and it allowed for the flexibility for a lot of acrobatic and martial arts movements. But it also had the tendency, if you're not careful, you wind up hyperextending the knee when you do the operatic walk. And so that really bothered him, and he ended up developing an upper leg and special hip joints so that the puppets would still be able to have the full range of motion, but without the knee hyperextending. And the old masters thought it was horrible and thought he was messing everything up to make an upper leg on things. But nowadays, a lot of the other marionette artists in China are building upper legs on their marionettes. So it's pretty interesting to see that.
And so then you married, was she the 5th generation?
6th.
6th.
Yeah. So my son's mother, we're separated now. But my son's mother comes from a puppet family performing the hand puppets. And so that's a technique that I learned a little bit of the hand puppet techniques from China as well. But I don't really perform that technique too much. You know, to really get good at that technique, you actually have to start training when you're a little kid to be able to build the flexibility in your fingers, because you want to be able to separate the 3 fingers from your index finger so that you know, you can keep the hands and neck and everything straight. And so there's a lot of training that if you want to get good at that, you really need to start training when you're, you know, 8 years old. And I didn't start training.
To have the chest go out like.
Yeah. And there's also a connection point here. A lot of hand puppets don't have legs, but the puppets from Fujian and across the straits in Taiwan, they tend to have legs attached, and they're attached to the point here that correlates to your palm. And so by a little twitch of your palm, you can get the character to walk, and a little bit more forceful, you can get it to do kicks and flips and all sorts of movements. So yeah, my son's mother comes from a family of there's my son's maternal grandpa. This one of his famous acts with Li Kui fights the tiger, and the other photograph, it looks like is from Shanghai. There was a a lot of film and TV puppet shows being produced. Yeah, so there's lots of interesting techniques, and my son Francisco started playing with both, you know, Western style puppets and Chinese style puppets when he was, you know, when he was a baby.
So at first, you, besides being a performer, you had some administrative parts in the puppet center. Now, I think let's talk a minute about what is a puppet center, because you know, sometimes I find it hard to explain what it is that I'm doing and why my day is so hectic, like to, you know, to decide what hat I'm wearing now. Am I the artistic director? Are we talking about the school? Are we talking about the museum? You know, it's puppetry, but each department, let's call it, has separate needs.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the really interesting things about working in puppetry today, because I think historically we didn't have this sort of institution for puppets. You know, historically there were puppet troupes which went around and performed, and there were theaters maybe where the puppet shows would happen, and then there were some museums with puppets, and they were all separate institutions. And so the notion of a puppet center really came about, you know, just in the last few decades. And here in America, the biggest puppet center is the Center for Puppetry Arts down in Atlanta, where I think we first met in person.
Yeah, that's what there's 2001, I think. Maybe
so, yeah. So they were the first puppet center here in America to kind of combine all those different ideas under one roof. And my parents, you know, when we were traveling around in Europe, mostly when we'd stop in a town, we would see the puppet theater, and we would see maybe a puppet museum if they had one, but they were generally separate institutions. And so for my parents, they thought it would be great to have all of that under one roof with, you know, the collections and the exhibits and the research, but also, you know, a theater with live performances happening and having it all combined. I think it really makes sense in a lot of ways, because there is some overlap areas, and, you know, the inspiration for new shows, you know, can come from having these, you know, research materials to look at for inspiration, and for even the technical aspects. If you're able to go back and look at something, you don't have to be reinventing the wheel all the time.
Yeah, exactly what you say.
Yeah, but like you say also that these elements are very different, and ideally with, you know, enough support for the arts, we should see, you know, organizations be able to sustainably grow to a level where you have, you know, the different departments with their own staff leads. But as it is, you know, especially in America, puppeteers tend to juggle a lot of hats. Just because of the finances of it all, it makes sense to do it yourself. Not necessarily because you want to do everything, but just because that's the way it works.
So is there a community around the center?
There's a puppet community just in general. And it's something we mentioned a little bit before we came on the air, is how, you know, puppeteers have really been pretty well connected, even internationally, for about a century now, and it's pretty remarkable. I believe Union Internationale de la Marionnette, UNIMA, is, I believe, the oldest international performing arts organization, membership organization. And so that's really amazing that puppeteers have been organized at an international level longer than any other performing arts. And you know, part of it, I think, comes from the notion that we were talking about earlier, how puppeteers are able to do so much themselves. You're able to, you know, run a puppet company with just a few people. So you find yourself maybe isolated locally with only a few colleagues. And so, you know, to build a community, we reach out to colleagues all over the world. And, you know, it's really nice to have that camaraderie and support from colleagues. And, you know, when there's festivals happening or something like that, it gives us all a chance to come together, and it really helps build the community in that regard. The festival that I mentioned that happened here in Seattle, a lot of people, even if they were living here in 1999, never knew it happened, because the puppet festivals that we have in America tend to be more like conferences, where it's not so much for the general public, it's for registrants, and we come in for the whole week of activities, and we have you know, lectures and workshops and performances, and we have all these different elements for the registrants, but not really a public component. So that's something that I'd be interested to see in America, is how festivals evolve. In a lot of countries, the puppet festivals are these great community events for the general public, but then there might be a few breakout sessions for professionals.
So let's take a short break and see the Halloween greeting video card.
Okay.
Someone prepared. I don't know who manipulated the puppet. I have a wild guess.
So that's a zombie marionette that is mostly, I think, appeared in a production of The Enchanted Castle. But I'm trying to think. Sometimes when we have a trick puppet, we wind up tossing it into other shows as well. But I'm pretty sure that one was Enchanted Castle, maybe only from that production. And one of the funny things about that one is the control actually snapped while we were on the road, and I had to do a really quick job of fixing the control. But then I ended up liking the new quick control better than the old one, so I never went back to rebuild it like it was originally constructed. And it's an adaptation of an old juggling marionette. A lot of times, you know, the vaudeville companies would have a clown that juggles a ball, or something like that, or a seal that juggles a ball. And so we did an adaptation of that, of having a zombie who juggles his own head.
So what would you say was the reputation of the Carter family marionettes among the like American community of puppeteers?
Well, that particular performance was actually from a show that was almost entirely.
I mean the company as itself.
Yeah.
Well,
I was mentioning that show because that was kind of typical for our work, is that show was actually done with the Sicilian style of rod marionettes, but we never really stuck specifically to a tradition. So that zombie was a string marionette, which would not be traditional in a Sicilian show. And so we kind of mixed it up a little bit, but our use of rod marionettes, I think, really stood out in this country, because not a lot of people were performing with that technique. In America, most marionettes are controlled all with strings. And so to have the metal rod, like the knight in the earlier clip, was a little bit unusual for performers in this country. A big influence for my parents was there was actually the Monteo family from New York. They were from Catania, was their ancestral hometown. And so they brought their technique of the giant Sicilian rod marionettes to New York's Little Italy in, I believe their company started in 1918. And my parents had a chance to see them in 1980, right before, you know, their family stopped performing. And so they were really an influence on my parents. And my parents later, I went one time to Sicily, but my parents took a couple of trips there to do research and visit some of the great puppeteers there. So I think our reputation for that technique in America really, set us apart. And one of the interesting things is after the Menteo family wasn't performing anymore, I believe we may have been the only ones performing with the rod marionettes, the Sicilian style rod marionettes, the only family in America performing. But we're, our ancestry isn't from Sicily, but we really love that technique. Aside from the puppetry community recognizing us for it, it was really nice to have recognition from the Italian-American community also. One of the photos earlier was when we took one of our Opera de Pupi shows to New Orleans. And I hadn't known it, but New Orleans actually has a big community of Sicilian Americans. And so it was really amazing. We had a lot of, first and second generation folks come up to us and say, wow, this is, fantastic. We had one little old lady come up and hug, there's a night marionette of Bradamante, and she came up and hugged the puppet and said, I never thought I'd see you again. She had seen the shows as a little girl in Sicily. So that was really sweet.
So, and when was it that the collection started growing up, the collection of puppets, other than your own? And also, I was wondering why. I mean, I read all over when we talk about the Cook Marks collection, sure. And I wondered why did it, we say in Hebrew, why did it fell on you?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the curious things about puppets is, as artists, we like to have reference materials. We like to have inspiration. And so for years, when we were touring, we would collect, a few puppet books. We would collect a few puppets, or friends would give us a present of a puppet from, their old shows. And so we kind of organically began growing these resources. But the first major gift for collection to us was actually a gift to our library. It was the Letty Connell Schubert collection. And she was a sweet friend from the Bay Area. And, after she passed away, her family decided to donate all of her own private research library to our organization. And so, at that point, our puppet research library instantly doubled. So we suddenly had a couple thousand puppet books, and at that point we started cataloging the books because it's more than just being able to, oh, that's here on the shelf. Because with our own little library, we kind of knew where things were, but with that donation, we needed to start taking collections seriously. And I think after receiving Letty's library, other collectors began taking notice of our collections and seeing that, okay, the Northwest Puppet Center is, holding these resources and making use of them. So we got a collection from, there's a local museum, the Museum of History and Industry, which just several years back moved to a new building. And so while they were preparing for their move, they were looking through some of their collections and seeing, what was relevant to their mission. And they decided to donate I think it was about 600 puppet books to us. And so that was the Josie Robbins collection. And, it's really interesting because all of these people are, people from our puppet community. And so Letty was a strong supporter of ours, and she would help arrange for us to tour in California, and we would stop to see her when we were passing through, and she would come up and visit us in Seattle. And then the Josie Robbins collection is really interesting because I wasn't familiar with her name, but it turns out that she was performing in Seattle. When we were just starting up, she was performing with her little company. And she also had a little collection of puppets. And of course, she had this collection of puppet books that we wound up with. And so one of the things when I found this new name is I asked my old friend Alan Cook. I said, hey, there's this lady, Josie Robbins, whose books all arrived here. Do you know anything about her? And Alan said, oh, of course, she's the one that first told me about your family. And so, you know, it's this small little network of these puppeteers scattered all over the country and all over the world, but they're all kind of interconnected with each other. And so there's Alan with the first puppet that he made when he was, you know, I think 7 years old, maybe 6 years old. It was a workshop that was done at the parks through the Works Progress Administration, a program during the Depression to help put people to work, but also to help keep people preoccupied so they wouldn't, you know, just be sitting around doing nothing. So they had these activities for kids, and then the puppeteers would get paid through the federal government. So it was a great program. And Alan, it was really funny. He wasn't quite of age. And so his mom said he was a few months older so that he would be at the age limit to be able to be accepted into the class. So yeah, that was Alan. And he, like I said, he first heard about our family because he received a letter in the mail from Josie Robbins saying, hey, there's this family of puppeteers now in Seattle doing some interesting shows. And so he invited us to perform at our first Puppeteers of America festival in California, which I believe was in 1981. I would have been 4 years old when I was performing at the festival for Alan, and I first met him. And so, you know, Alan saw us with Letty's collection and with Josie's collection, and he'd been looking for a permanent home for his lifelong project, was building a collection of puppets.
He had something like 6,000. Am I right?
He never got a final count, and I'm still working on it. So they had rented a space and moved several times with a little group that they had, a group of friends and volunteers that were working on it in California. But you know, as you know, some of them were thinking about the permanence of it. They realized they needed to find a permanent home for the collection, not just, you know, moving around with the different rental spaces that they had over the years. And so they were looking at different institutions around the country, and they decided to donate this, you know, collection of thousands of puppets to us. So it was a massive project. And originally, like I mentioned, there was a major promise of financial support. So we were able to get that storage space for a number of years. And for Alan's 80th birthday, some of his friends decided they wanted to make a book with a bunch of photographs and some of Alan's stories. And so they initially asked Lumen Code, who was in that previous photo, to make it. And he volunteered for several years and took, I think, about 3,000 beautiful photos. And then there was a difference of opinions, and they wound up doing a different book instead. And so there's a book with some of the puppets and some of the stories. There's Alan with another legend of the puppetry community. That's actually Aurora Valentinetti. Jackie Marks took that photograph, but the lady there sitting down in the chair is Aurora Valentinetti, who is another character of our puppet community. She, from 1942 until 1992, for 50 years, she ran the puppetry program at the University of Washington. So it was pretty remarkable tenure that she had there at the university. And she's so funny because she said the first time she came to see our family perform was when we were down by the Pike Place market. And she said she kept being really distracted because there was this little baby crawling around by the stage. And she was trying to figure out who was the parent and why weren't they, you know, pulling this kid back. And it turned out that was me, and my parents were preoccupied performing, so I was just kind of crawling around. and then later, my dad took me to her class around the same time. You know, I was still a baby, and she always tells me that at that point she wanted to grab me and throw me in her sink and clean me up a bit. So I was little baby with a stinky diaper or something.
Were you like the prince of puppetry?
No, not at all. We don't really have.
It's not an innocent question. It's one of the impressions I still carry from that Unima Council in 2001. That you would walk and there will always be like a circle of people around you. I clearly remember that.
Well,
and the prince of puppetry is a term I'm carrying since then.
Oh wow, that's kind of you. But I think it's more like the puppetry community. We're almost like an extended family, and so a lot of these puppeteers, you know, I might see them only once every few years. But then when we get together, it's like a big family reunion. And so, you know, we just all gather together. There's only one puppet royalty that I know about, and sadly, we lost her to COVID this year. She was Bernice Silver, and she might have been the oldest puppeteer in the world. She was 106. She was really amazing.
Oh, yeah, you know, I was talking with Andrew Young, that has a Puppet Vision blog, and he has the film that he's working on, and he said he will finish it after the COVID. So it means sometimes when the COVID will pass away. But he had her last interview. It was with him.
Oh, amazing!
It's filmed. Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. So the festival that we had here in Seattle in 1999. We actually had the coronation of Bernice Silver was here in Seattle, and we had a friend of ours from Vancouver, Canada. We had him make a chariot for her, and so we gave Bernice the crown, and she became our Queen of Potpourri. And in the Puppeteers of America festivals, in the late night sessions, we would have what we called potpourri, where people would come in and do short little impromptu acts. And Bernice would always show up and do wonderful performances, sometimes more rehearsed and sometimes less rehearsed, and, you know, found objects and all sorts of, you know, she was just a wonderful character. I actually first met her, though, when we were the same height. And for anybody who knew Bernice, I think she never reached 5 feet tall. I think she was about 4'8". And we met at a puppet festival in Montana. And since we were the same height, we danced together at that festival. And she also, at that festival, she rescued us from the mountains. This is the great story of Bernice. There was a group of us, and the festival had organized a guide to take anybody who wanted to go up hiking in the mountains. And so there was a group of us, including Jane Henson was with us on this little hike. And so we were all out there hiking in the mountains, and none of us were really paying attention to the trail because we had a guide with us. And then all of a sudden it was starting to get dark, and our guide was kind of looking around and we started to get worried. And so eventually the guide admitted that he had lost the trail, and we had no idea how to get back to where the shuttle was supposed to pick us up. But for some reason, and it was just, you know, fate or anything or magic or whatever you want to believe in. But Bernice Silver, you know, at that point she was already, you know, probably 80 years old or something like that. But at that festival, she decided, you know, she wasn't able to go on the hike, but for whatever reason, she decided she wanted to go with a shuttle to go pick up all the hikers. And so she went with the driver, and they were at the bottom of the mountain waiting for us, and we never showed up, and the sun was going down. And Bernice started singing. She was at the bottom of the mountain singing for us, and Bernice's song guided us down the mountain, and she saved all of us. Otherwise, you know, all of us would still be lost up there in the mountains of Montana.
Going back to the Cook Marks collection, how many items did you receive? Yeah,
they donated the entire collection to us and closed down their space in California. And it was a couple thousand puppet books. So again, our puppet research library doubled again. And then probably 5,000-6,000 puppets. But like I said, we don't have an exact count on it yet. And one of the projects that we are doing when we have the storage space is actually trying to sort through everything. And it gave us the space where we could just, like, you know, be spreading things out and, you know, trying to do proper identification, assess condition issues and make logical groupings was actually one of the biggest tasks, because some of this stuff would sometimes be sprinkled about, and it makes more sense to have, you know, everything from the same tradition in the same place, or everything from the same artist.
Do you do restoration?
Well, generally, it's such a huge task with, you know, thousands of puppets. You know, at one point I did the math, and if I only spent 1 hour on each puppet, it would take a few years to get through everything. And some of the puppets require like a week of work, you know, or a few days of work. So, you know, at that point, I decided I can't really afford at this point to be doing, you know, a systematic approach to the entirety. And so what we do instead is each time that we curate a new exhibit, it gives us a chance to focus in on a smaller topic area. And so the puppets for a specific exhibit, we have a chance to work on. And then that book that you showed earlier, that was also a chance where, you know, Alan and his friend Jackie decided certain puppets they wanted to take photos of. And so then, you know, when those puppets I found for them, and we get ready for the photo session, and some of those puppets before the photos could happen would need some work. A lot of work untangling, a lot of work restringing. When possible, I try to leave the original strings, but when too deteriorated, it's sometimes unsafe. You know, if it's hanging on a rotting string, it's going to snap, and you don't want the puppet to fall. And so you need to make those, you know, decisions on each and every puppet. When you have thousands of puppets, it's a huge task. And with a lot of the puppets being, you know, ones that Alan collected when he was a young man from some of the older puppeteers, you know, the previous generation, there's a lot of puppets, you know, from, you know, the turn of the century, from late 1800s into, you know, 1950s. You know, a huge number of the puppets are kind of that vintage.
So I want to show you a news report, a short news report that was made about an exhibition we had.
Oh, great!
2 years ago, and we got a collection. It was only 20 puppets, and they were 80 years old, and some of them were really damaged. So I'll give you a break from talking. You can drink now.
Okay. More coffee.
מוזיאון אמנות תיאטרון הבובות הוא חלק ממתחם שנקרא מרכז תיאטרון בובות בחולון. מתחם שלמיטב ידיעתנו יש כמוהו אחד במזרח התיכון. הרבה בובנאים שאספו במהלך השנים בובות, חיפשו לתת את המוזיאון לאיזשהו מקום, ואכן יש כאן תצוגה ויש כאן מאות בובות מהארץ ומהעולם. אותנו מה שמעניין זה כל הפעילות שמאחורה של המחקר ושל השימור, כי זו הדרך שלנו לתת את הכבוד לאותם אומנים שפעלו כאן פעם, ומכיוון שלא היה אינטרנט ובעיתונות נתנו להם מקום מצומצם, אף אחד בעצם לא ידע עליהם. כך שמבחינתנו החשיבות היא הבאת הבובות והסיפורים שמאחורי הבובות לתודעת הציבור.
עכשיו קיבלנו אוסף של בובות מתיאטרון ומקיון, שהבובות האלו עשויות לפני 80 שנה. הבובות מאוד מושקעות. ראשים עשויים בעיקר מעץ, שחקנים היו חיים קשים. לסחוב את זה, לשחק עם זה, זה ממש כבד. קיבלנו בובה בלי עיניים, בלי אף, היה שבור, הצבע התקלף, אז הייתי צריכה לשחזר. זה אחד מהבגדים של בובה, פשוט הדבקתי את הדברים האלו, זה מה שיש כאלו תלבושות במצב כזה שאי אפשר לשחזר. קנינו בד כזה, אז יצא לנו בובה כזאת.
כמה זמן בערך לוקח לשחזר בובה, למשל מה שאת מחזיקה ביד?
יש בובות במצב יותר קשה ויש במצב יותר קל. זה יכול לקחת יומיים, זה יכול לקחת גם שבועיים. בובה של הצגה איזושהי, חבר'ה, זה עשוי מעיתון של פעם, רואים פה אותיות. בדרך כלל בובות עושים מעיתונים. הנה, זה היסטוריה, ממש מצמרר. מה לעשות פה? יכול להיות שאפשר לתקן את הבובה הזאת, יכול להיות שזה בלתי אפשר לתקן, אז נצטרך לפסל מחדש. נתנו כבוד לתיאטרון, כן, להישאר ולהראות איך היו עושים פעם בתיאטרון הזה. הם היו עושים מקרטון או מנייר, אז פשוט היה מאוד חשוב, זה חלק של הרצון שלנו, הכבוד שלנו לתיאטרון הזה.
Whoa, that was great.
I have the puppets here. I'll just show. This is the wait. This is the on the right. That's the picture that we got from the family.
Oh, fantastic!
Luckily, there was some picture that helped us. So in the middle, the picture is the way we got her. It was all torn.
Yeah.
But it had enough fabric for us to see what kind of fabric it is, and we find a matching fabric, but it had no spots on it. So Irena Liski, the puppeteer, she painted it by hand.
Wow.
One by one. And the dilemma was how much of artistic freedom we can have to do the restoration, and it was none. We decided unless we will do the most of the effort to make it similar, although no one we know, even the family, the original, it's that the grandson who just, it was stored somewhere in his storage place.
Sure.
And there were also, so we have it here, yeah, but she is.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, she's fantastic. That's great.
That's a hand-painted.
Oh, the polka dots, yeah.
What we did, since we had some picture, we scanned it with a very high resolution scanner, so we can enlarge the picture and see the texture of the fabric. And also, we had like 3 months. We were supposed to get an exhibition from the Thunderika Theater in Romania. For our festival in July for a 1-year exhibition, and in April they told us that no, it's not going to happen.
Oh no!
So we had like 3 months to do the restoration. And you know, Irena has her own style, but she couldn't. I mean, if she painted, we were looking at the picture. It had to be exactly the same way of painting and mixing the colors.
Did a good job.
And there were also, I will show another one that this one. Oh wait, what? Where's the picture?
But it's definitely one of those things that a lot of people don't think about, all the conservation work and all of those decisions, those little decisions that have to be made by someone, you know, what sort of approach to take, how much to do, you know, where to take liberties. Oh, so nice.
This is how we got her without eyes, without know that the one she was talking about. We had that picture.
And rebuilt.
And rebuild it. I think it's very identical.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Nice work. Oh, lovely. And where was this company?
Mukyon, they were an engineer, and Susie, she had another professional, like the one who delivers the babies. I don't know the term.
Yeah. Midwife, and maybe. Yeah.
They met in Paris, and they immigrated. They came to Palestine in 1936. They came with a boat, and it was a storm, so the ship couldn't enter the port of Tel Aviv.
Wow.
So they continued. The ship continued to Haifa, and this is where they came off the ship, and this is where they stayed. And they rented an apartment, and one Saturday morning, they had a mosquito inside their apartment, so they started to chase the mosquito. Bernard had a rolled newspaper. He was running, and Susie was running after him, screaming, "Kill him! Kill him! Kill him!" And when they accomplished the mission and the mosquito was dead, Susie told him, "You know, this scene, reminds me of the puppet shows I used to see in Luxembourg Garden in Paris.
Oh, wow.
And it's a shame that there's no puppet shows here in Palestine for children. So they thought and said, so if there's no puppet shows, maybe we should do some.
Yeah.
So they sailed back to Europe and stayed a year in Paris, learned puppetry with, I don't remember the name now.
At the Guignol Theater there at the park, yeah.
That was the beginning. They went there, they got a job, and one of the employees told them, you should study with a real master.
Oh.
So he gave the name, I'm sorry, I don't remember it now, but now he's considered to be the father of the pedagogic puppetry in France.
Was it Jacques Chenet?
No.
No, not Chenet. Okay.
I can look for the file while we're speaking.
It's okay. We'll talk about that later. That's interesting. That's really great story. Yeah.
So they studied there, and after a year, they came back to Israel, and they had the theater for, I think, 8 years on and off, because it's very hard to make a living from it. And at some point, they wanted a child, and it was a depression in Palestine, and they decided to. And we knew about them. We knew about them, but we couldn't locate anything.
Oh, that's so exciting to receive that.
You know that people who come to Israel back then had to change their name to Hebrew names. So while I was looking under the Hebrew name, they kept their European name.
Oh, interesting.
And well, it's a long story. One
day we'll talk more about it.
I will tell you about how we got it and what came out of it. And
fantastic, yeah.
Wait, someone is writing. Amazing. I need sunglasses like Irena. Yeah, she was wearing these glasses that makes everything bigger.
Yeah.
When she works. So the dilemma is always what to do with the puppet, and do we need just to make it look good for the display, or we need to make it work like it used to work, and we don't always know how it works.
No, we don't. And one of the interesting things I think with string marionettes is that a lot of times when they're restrung, they don't keep the original height. And so one of the things I try to do is when I have the original strings, if they're wearing out, I try to get that measurement. Because if you know the height of the strings, you know basically what their stage would have been like. And so when I'm restringing puppets, I often, if I have the original height, I try to keep the original height with the new strings. So yeah, there's all these little details that I think are only interesting for other puppet nerds.
It's also, this is something that you know because you know it like inside out, not because you're a puppet builder. You also know what it means to use the string and the importance of the strings.
And with this technique, it's really interesting. The Chinese technique of string marionettes, there's actually a slack in the strings. And usually when European string marionettes are done, the string is taut, but the limb will be at rest. So the hands will be totally down, but the string doesn't have any extra slack in it. But for the Chinese marionettes, there's actually slack in it because when you're holding the paddle with one hand, you grab the strings with your other, and when you pull it away the proper distance, then you have it at taut. You have the string taut when you have it in the proper hold. And so a lot of times I see Chinese marionettes have been restrung, and they're hanging in someone's house for decoration, and they've been strung in the Western way, which is not correct.
So there's this picture that caught my eye because of the puppet.
Yeah, it's a fun little toy puppet. There's a great, a lot of times great epic stories that are told with puppet shows, because before you could binge a show on a streaming service, what would you do at night? You'd go to the puppet show. And so each week sometimes they would have a different episode in a giant saga. That's the way they would perform the shows in Sicily. And I've heard that, the whole story, it would take like 3 years to get through the whole story. And so that little toy puppet is actually from a great epic story from Japan. And it's the warrior monk, Benkei. And he has a famous episode that's performed by puppets. and also performed, I believe, in the Kabuki Theater as well. It's Benkei on the bridge, and Benkei encounters this fellow Yoshitsune, and they have a battle. And for a European equivalent, I often mention the story of Robin Hood running into Little John on the bridge. And so they have a little battle, and the big guy gets beaten up by the little guy. You know, that's kind of a common theme that happens in a lot of puppet shows, is the little guy wins. And
but
so
this is not this is a puppet show performance, or is it for a workshop?
Yeah, so the story is a big story, and because of this story, the characters become very famous. And so the little puppet that I have there was for a workshop, and it's just a very simple little toy puppet. But people would make that, and you know, they could play with that at home, or you know, they buy it as a souvenir, you know, outside at a street festival, or you know, maybe people were selling merchandise outside of the show, so you might go you know, to the fancy big theater, and then afterwards people would be trying to, you know, have a little street business and sell little souvenirs.
But do you build puppets like this in the center's workshops?
Yeah, so that's one that I've done a few times as a workshop. Some friends in Japan showed me how to build them, and they were telling me that the technique kind of disappeared for a couple generations because, you know, the traditional toys, you know, fell out of favor when factory toys became popular, and there's, you know, plastic toys and everything. But now people enjoy, you know, having a little craft project. So it's not really a good business to be hand building them and selling them for 50 cents. You know, you spend too much time building it, but it's a fun little project that you can make at home. And I've done it on a few occasions teaching that workshop. And the funny thing is for the workshop, we wind up spending so much of the time preparing everything. You know, we're cutting out, let's see, I think there's 6 pieces of bamboo, and you know, all these different little tiny pieces that you have to cut out. And we use power tools to make it a little bit faster, but you know, it's too dangerous to let the kids use a bandsaw. So we'll pre-cut all of the pieces, and then the kids can decorate and assemble.
Yeah, so let's watch it moving because it's hilarious.
Okay. Yeah. So Benkei is famous for having a halberd. So he has that giant spear-looking thing. And then Yoshitsune usually is built differently. He usually has a sword in one hand and a fan in the other hand. And the toy never really seemed as popular as the Benkei toy, the Yoshitsune toy. But Yoshitsune is really the hero of the story. And part of it is that the toy is a little bit harder to build, so maybe the toy puppet makers, you know, didn't want to waste all the time on Yoshitsune.
So in 2014, you kindly sent us puppets for the children, what's it called? Yeah, Children Plays exhibition. There were 2 different shows. I think these were made by your parents.
Yeah, the hand puppets on the left of the screen, or the center of the screen, those ones were made for a production of Cenerentola, the Italian version of Cinderella. My parents had the chance to do some research in Venice, and they found a couple of interesting materials that we actually created shows from. One was this hand puppet script for Cenerentola, and the other was we were able to find the musical score for Stornuto de Ercole, the Sneeze of Hercules, which was a marionette opera done at the Venetian Carnival, and I'm forgetting the exact year. I think the mid-1700s. So yeah, that's the hand puppets were from our recreation and adaptation of an old Venetian hand puppet production of Cinderella. And then the marionettes that were on the other side of the screen were made by our friend who actually carved the orca whale outside also. Those are by George David, New Channel carver. And for a really famous Northwest Coast story of Raven and the Box of Daylight, there's the story that in the early times, the world was all in darkness, and there was a chief that kept all of the light locked away in a bentwood box, a cedar box, and kept it locked closed. And Raven tries to figure out a way, because it's hard getting around in the world when everything's dark, and so he tries to figure out a way to sneak into the house and get light out into the world. And so he tries all of these different methods to get into the house, and nothing works. And I think there's several versions of the story, but the most common version is eventually Raven, he transforms himself various times, and he transforms himself into a pine needle. And the chief, who has the light locked away and kept in his house, the chief's daughter drinks the water with a pine needle inside of it, but that pine needle is actually Raven, who's transformed himself. So he tricks his way into the house that way, because she becomes pregnant and has a little raven baby, and Raven steals light and brings it out into the world. It's a beautiful story.
I'm listening to you. I've been listening to you for a long time now. Do you realize that you are exploding with knowledge about puppetry? So which in one way it's always because you do know puppetry inside out, and not just doing it, but also teaching, speaking about. You earned your knowledge with sweat.
Yeah, absolutely.
But and when I'm thinking about myself, I say, yeah, I know a lot about puppetry. But when I try to think about life, I just go, what's going outside of puppetry? Like, do you have other hobbies?
Sure, yeah, and that's an important thing, with growing up doing puppets. A lot of people start doing puppets as a hobby and try to make it into a career. But for me, it was always kind of the opposite. I always saw puppetry as work, and it's a very interesting work, and I'm really privileged to have been able to make a career out of it. But at the same time, it's not my hobby; it's my work. And so I do have other hobbies, As a kid, I would skateboard sometimes, and I gave it up for a few years. But my son several years ago talked me into getting a longboard, so I'll go out and longboard sometime. It's easier on these old man knees to have a longboard. They have bigger and softer wheels, and I've been wanting to get back into riding my bike again more. And recently, I actually. I got a second-hand kayak really cheap, and so it's a good socially distanced. Oh, there you got a picture of it. It's a good socially distanced exercise and way to keep sanity in these crazy times. And there, I've got a shirt on that was a fundraiser for a friend, Paul Vincent Davis, who's one of the original people involved with a puppet show place. And Puppet Showplace is a beautiful puppet center in Boston. Who Puppet Showplace is going through some difficult times and really needs some help these days. So if anybody, I thought I should give them a little shout out there since I had Paul's shirt on.
He was the one. I was subscribed to Puppeteers of America as a non-member, just for a subscription.
Oh, great!
And I saw a photo of him. I think it was maybe Aladdin or Alibaba or one of those, but in a very low stage, and he was sitting on a low chair with wheels, and that was the first time ever that I saw a puppeteer that can sit and move himself. So I still have this picture with him and the beard and the hat, like
yeah. I think I saw that picture before too, but I can't remember which production it was. But yeah, it's a great photo.
So I think we are running out of time, so let's just play a game.
Okay.
I think because I prepared all the slides and made them into the 10 minutes waiting video.
Oh, great.
So I was thinking, since these puppets have photographs, it means that they're already out of their boxes.
Oh, so, do I need to identify them all now?
Yeah, no, not all of them, but let's just quickly.
Okay, I'll try to run through them with you.
Let's see. So who's this?
Oh, that's Shakespeare by Bruce Schwartz, and Bruce Schwartz was actually I think the first puppeteer to ever receive the MacArthur Genius Award. Yeah, he's a great figure in the puppet community.
Bruce Schwartz is the one from the performing the ballerine at the Muppets.
Exactly, there's a clip of him performing.
I believe I'm having a religious experience. He had also a video of him manipulating.
I don't think I saw that video. I never had a chance to see him perform. He performed at the 1980 festival in Washington, D.C., but my parents left me home for that festival. It was too expensive for me to go. Oh, and that's one of the hand puppets from the movie of Lily.
Yeah.
The hand puppets for that show were created by Walton and O'Rourke. And Alan had a chance, the movie studio was having an auction. And Alan was actually busy with a touring show, and so he wasn't able to go to the auction, and he sent a friend to go to the auction and bid on his behalf. And it was way before, cell phones or any way of staying in touch. So he just had to trust his friend to bid for him. And he was able to get 3 of the 4 puppet characters from that movie. They're the originals from the movie.
Yeah, we've seen a clip of the movie in one of the previous shows. We had a riddle, a weekly riddle. And it was connected to one of them. So
what's really funny? Really funny about Lily is the puppets are here, and everybody talks about it, but I've never actually seen the movie. So hopefully you won't ask me trivia questions about the movie.
Oh yeah, I have the video cassette.
Oh, okay.
I have it. So this one is very easy.
Oh yeah, that's Carmen Miranda by Frank Paris. And one of the amazing things about this is he actually got permission from Carmen Miranda to build this puppet. A lot of puppeteers would do caricature puppets of famous people, but they would just do it on their own. But he actually asked permission and received permission. And Carmen Miranda's agent actually sent pieces of scraps from her costume so that they could have reference material for the costume.
And that will be the last one because we don't have time. Who's
okay.
this?
What is that one? I'm forgetting what that one is at the moment. Do you have a note on it? Oh, this one is from Teatro Piccoli, from Vittorio Podreca's company. I think it's from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or something like that.
So actually what you have under your hands is major parts of the history, the American puppetry.
Definitely American puppetry and some international as well. We have fantastic examples from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, a little bit from South America, but we don't have a strong collection from South America. And for a long time, I thought we didn't have anything from Australia, from the continent, but I've recently learned that they include Indonesia in the continent. So we have lots of Australasian continent puppets then. I think the only continent we don't have puppets from is Antarctica. So I'm waiting for a scientist to make and send us a puppet. So
do you feel the weight of the responsibility on your shoulders?
Sure, it's a huge responsibility. But actually, with our own family collection, I felt the responsibility to preserve everything before we started receiving other collections. And so this just, strengthens the reason and strengthens the importance, because it's not just about preserving, my family's art. It's about preserving puppetry in general. And I try often to keep, ego out of it and keep myself in the background. As puppeteers, we hide behind the curtains and we let the puppets get the limelight.
Some of us. Some of us go out and do live broadcasting,
Yeah.
Well, it's the first time. This year is the first time that I do something with my own face.
Yeah.
Usually I'm behind and under, and you get to see the puppet. So it's kind of because the COVID takes me, I have to do this as well. This is me. So I would like to say thank you. I mean, there's lots and lots that we can talk about, and maybe we should.
I was worried we'd run out of things to say, but that was great. Thank you so much.
No, we have I have lots of material that we don't have the time to show, but there will be other opportunities. Let's see some comments. Oh, here's Dudi. Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you, Ilan. What history, what stories and names. Oh, this is nice. The true Puppet Center is in heads full of knowledge, experience, and memories of yours, and you are definitely preserving and passing on the art of puppetry. Thank you, Dudi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's exciting to read it. So you don't have to disconnect, but I'm going to show the... every week I have the same problem. I don't know how to say this word in English. The closure.
Yeah.
Closing videos. But
that's always the problem with puppet shows too, is how to end the show.
No, we oh, there's another comment. Yeah.
Oh,
thank you both. Thank you, James, for staying with us for so long. And this will be the official closing. Don't go.
Okay.